silver hair that resembles moonlight, a feline look, and eyes as blue as the firmament on a clear day. This character is very famous. A long time ago, a girl got hooked on a novel called The Unlikely Saint, and the main villain's name is Liz Agnes. Despite her cold-blooded image, she knew suffering, despair better than anyone else. And so the girl went to the mirror and saw the unusual appearance of the character in the reflection, named Rachel Agnes, and it all worked out. So the girl ended up in the body of her favorite novelist's sister, which means, that very soon she would be able to see the marvelous Liz with her own eyes. She thought that dreams do come true after all. Liz. Actually, she's the illegitimate daughter of a duke who was a commoner all her childhood. But Rachel Agnes, her sister on her father's side, was suddenly hit with an inheritance. And then she died. Then the girl was taken into a noble family where she was bullied by everyone who could. As time went on, Liz's soul grew darker and darker. They turned the child who had been thrown into an unknown world into a real monster. The girl was very annoyed by this, but why she likes the villain so much more than the protagonist is a very interesting question. In fact, not only is Liz very beautiful and seductive, she also managed to awaken magical powers within herself. And afterward, she crushed all those who bullied her. The girl, as soon as she remembers the end that awaited her, just tears come to her eyes. Every time she doesn't understand who called love a beautiful feeling. Love, in her opinion, is pure desire, a thirst to subjugate someone and have absolute power over them. That was the opinion she had come to, and that was how she had lived all these years. The feeling is just like mana, growing stronger as the table to her heart slows, even though she'd never been able to get the one that made her heart slow down. But at least she had tried, so she regretted nothing. The girl wondered if she had known a little about how to love before. Then her ending could have been completely different, and there's no way Liz Agnes would have chosen that life. So at least she'll die of her own free will. Her ending could have been completely different. Those words make Rachel so sad. Even though Liz claimed to regret nothing, thoughts of a different outcome prove otherwise. Then suddenly the girl thought, wouldn't it have been much better if she had been able to show her the other ending? Then the girl would have understood. So now Rachel's goal is to live in this world with her little sister until she turns into a gray-haired old lady. But at that moment someone knocked on the girl's door and asked if she was up already. Rachel replied that she should come in. And at that moment the door to her room opened and a maid came in. She said good morning to Rachel and told her that she had brought her favorite wine from the grapes of Mount Lewis. It just has an awesome connotation. At that moment Rachel thought she was very lucky to know all these characters, and thanks to the memories from her past life, she would be able to save hers. An older maid named Abigail told the girl that just one sip would make her feel better immediately. She would forget all the hardships of life. The maid said that if the girl rested a little, nothing would happen. This woman had been the head maid of the Agnes family for 10 years, and she managed to drive Rachel completely insane, slowly brainwashing her and then taking advantage of the Duchess's disturbed mind. She got her power of attorney, and thus began to rule the territory as she pleased. Rachel, who had lost her parents to an accident, immediately bestowed with the title of Duchess, without even leaving time to recover from the shock. Not surprisingly, the senior maid, who was always at her side, seized the opportunity. Unfortunately, Abigail's plan was successful. Then Rachel remembered everything, said she had a headache somehow, and alcohol would only make it worse. So have her take it back. The maid was surprised at this answer, but then said she was listening to her, and would do anything. Then she added that there was no better cure for a headache than sleep. She would come back after the girl had rested. Without any evidence, it was clear what Rachel wanted Abigail to do. She would put her to bed while she imagined herself mistress of the duchy. So Rachel replied that she shouldn't be so intrusive. She got nervous, said she was sorry, and added that in that case she would prepare a bath for her. At this point, Rachel is 20 years old and has been drinking uncontrollably for 6 months, neglecting her responsibilities. And there's a lot of work to be done before inviting Liz to live with her. The girl thought that the first thing she needed to do was to get rid of Abigail, who'd attacked her sister as soon as she'd gotten to the mansion. She couldn't let the maid manipulate her anymore. At this point, Rachel climbed into the bathroom and thought it was ridiculous she was washing herself in a duchy that was going to hell. But the water was a miracle. She wasn't going to argue that. But at that moment her musings were interrupted by another maid, who ran in and wished her a pleasant bath. She had a bottle of wine in her hand, and the maid said she thought it might make the bathing a little better. Rachel looked at the bottle and remembered that it was the same wine that Abigail had so insistently tried to pour into her. The maid, before she left, said that if the girl needed anything else, to just have her call her. Rachel looked at her angrily and asked, "Who told you to bring that here?" The girl was very frightened. She dropped the fork and knife she was holding, and quickly began to beg Her Highness to forgive her. The maid said that she had made a terrible mistake, only because she had only recently gotten into the mansion, and proceeded to apologize to Rachel. At that moment, the girl thought she should start with the smallest thing, namely to show that people that she had changed. So she told the maid not to worry, and asked her what her name was. Anne. Calling her name, tears came to her eyes. She couldn't believe that Rachel really wasn't mad. Then she said that the maid had not quite got the hang of it, and could not have thought of bringing the wine herself. Rachel said she was only wondering who had sent her. Anne now understood the point of the question, and said that it was an order from the head maid. She said that Rachel would definitely want a drink. The girl, hearing this, thought for a moment, and afterward she said to the maid that, well, let her give her this bottle. Then added that Anne should tell the head maid that she liked everything. The maid bowed and said she would do it all. Rachel thought alcohol, 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 but she didn't understand why Abigail was relentlessly trying to get her drunk on this particular brand of wine. Then she read the label, and everything became clear to her. After that, the girl continued taking a bath. After a while, she got out and thought she felt much better. Her thoughts were a little hazy from the hangover, but otherwise she was doing pretty well. Rachel is sure things would have been much worse if she had drunk that wine with the powder slipped into it. But at that moment the girl heard some noise outside the door. She said that the morning had just begun, and already there was a commotion. Then she asked the maid to let him in. But the maid did nothing. They just stood there looking at each other. Rachel didn't understand what this staring was all about. But then a man came into the room and said that this was the day Rachel would have to listen to him. The girl looked at the person who entered and realized who it was. But she asked again, "He's Marcus, isn't he?" The man replied that he was even amazed that she still remembered his name. He was honored. Rachel thought at that moment, if she could hear some gnashing of teeth, but then she realized that if it really was the same Marcus, she was very lucky. She was just about to look for him, but here he came himself. This man was an aide to the dead Duke Agnes, and soon he became Liz's right-hand man, and he's also the only one who knows where the little girl is now. Rachel then said they'd had enough of the fuss and suggested he go inside and talk things over quietly. It was Marcus who brought Liz into the Agnes household after Rachel's death to make the girl the new Duchess. At that moment, Rachel and Marcus went into the room and started drinking tea. The man said that it had been 6 months since he had last seen her sober. It was certainly unpleasant, but Rachel couldn't really argue with it. For the last 6 months, the heroine had been drowning her sorrows in wine every day. She drank even more often than she ate. The girl thought she should be ashamed, but she did not feel any negative consequences of her lifestyle. At the time, she thought maybe it was her superpower, but then she realized no, then the real Rachel wouldn't have died so soon. After thinking it over, Rachel asked Marcus what he wanted to talk to her about. The man pulled out some papers and said it was a summary of the duchy's affairs for the last 6 months. The girl took the papers and asked if he had done such a massive job himself. Marcus said that yes, it was all him. The girl remembers when she read about Novella. She immediately noted his talent. Not for nothing after all, Marcus became the assistant of the main villain. Rachel said she would look into those documents a little later, but for now she would like to hear a brief report. Marcus replied that the farms of the era were left without redheads, and the soldiers and knights had not been paid their wages for a month, and ever-increasing taxes are forcing the inhabitants to leave the duchy. In addition, there are more and more victims of wild animals near the borders. Many have long been sharpening their blades, waiting for the right moment to organize an uprising. Rachel suspected, of course, that things were not going well in the duchy, but she didn't think it was that bad. Then she asked Marcus how they'd gotten to this point. The man was silent for a moment and then asked in a quiet voice, "Has she already forgotten that she has delegated her authority to the head maid?" After a long silence, Marcus said that she was the one who handled all the paperwork, and in fact the duchy was run not by Rachel, but by some maid. The girl thought it was a nightmare. She said that in that case she needed to get rid of her minions first. The man was surprised. But Rachel went on and said that she already had a request that involved the head maid. And at that moment she pulled out the bottle of wine that Abigail kept offering her. Marcus was angry when he saw her, but the girl calmed him down and told him he didn't have to worry. She hadn't gotten it out to drink. The man asked, then she explained herself. Rachel said that a bottle of this wine was given to her by the head maid, and she really wants Marcus to find out what it's made of. At this point, the man pounded his fist on the table and said he just couldn't believe it. But then he said that he couldn't say. But something had definitely been put in the drink. He didn't understand who one had to be to go to such a mean thing. Marcus was very angry about the situation. Rachel was drinking tea at this point and thought she couldn't believe what she was hearing. This from a man who could be a heartless schemer in the near future. But if Marcus hadn't changed so drastically, he wouldn't have been able to protect the little Duchess. This moment, she set the cup back on the saucer and thought of Liz. But at that moment, Marcus stood up, bowed to the Duchess, and said that he would be executed. He would return as soon as he found out all the details of the examination. At that moment, Rachel thought that Marcus was unfaithful to her 100%. He was loyal only to his homeland and to the dead Duke. But one day he will start helping Liz after all. That's why the girl is counting on him now. She knows that Marcus won't let her down in difficult situations. Rachel needs to do everything she can to ensure a happy future for her beloved Liz. But first she makes a list of the traitors she needs to get rid of, and it can't be delayed. At this time, two men were talking. One of them said it was just unbearable. Rupert Archer, he is the deputy commander, approached the captain and asked when he would pay the salaries of those who still had not received them. Dale Waver, commander of Agnes's night squad, was pouring wine and said, "Is the lad at it again? Let him tell them to wait some more." Robert was angry, but tried to ask in a calm voice how long he was going to order them to put up with all this. Does he really mean that people should just tighten their belts tighter and keep working for free? But the captain, when he heard this, got very angry. He looked at the boy and called him a brat, asking if he had forgotten who he was talking to. At that moment, the guy thought that his brain had completely spoiled. He doesn't even know what he's saying anymore. He doesn't understand how the Agnes family got to this state. At this point, the commander decided to teach his assistant a lesson and started beating him. Rupert asked him to stop, but Dale asked, "What happens if he doesn't want to?" The boy thought he couldn't go on like this. The knighthood was surely doomed, but then he thought he had to be patient. If he did something stupid, his men would get it too. At this time, all the other knights were sitting around the table eating dinner. One of them got up from the table and said that he couldn't eat with all this going on around him. The guy got up from the table and asked, "Does he really think they have nowhere else to go? You have to know your measure in everything." Knight said she'd had enough of this circus, and they were leaving. His comrades supported him and said they would go along with them. The commander stopped. He didn't understand what was happening and asked the knights, "What are they doing? Why are they leaving?" But the knights didn't listen to him. They just walked in silence. Someone wished him a happy stay. Then Dale became indignant and asked, "Are they out of their minds? Make them stop quickly." He touched his blade and told them to stop, or he would cut them all down. But then, all of a sudden, some girl came in and asked, "And then, what will he do?" She said that if he wasn't aware of it, he could be heard perfectly well even from outside. It was Rachel. She walked in on the guys and asked, what was he going to do? A few minutes before, the girl had been passing by and heard some noise. Then she peered through the crack and saw the older maid's cousin. The girl immediately recognized that it was Dale Waver, a typical representative of people who get everything through connections and good contacts. Then she looked at the guy standing next to him and saw that it was Rupert Archer, the powerful knight who protects the main character saint in her most dangerous moments. The girl thought that the novella said he was originally part of Agnes's squad. The girl thought that, judging from the atmosphere, this was the day he was leaving Rachel's estate. There was no way he could miss Rupert. He is an outstanding person who will reach the rank of master in the future. And if the girl doesn't keep him by her side, he will become a hindrance to Liz in the future. Rachel asked the commander, "So he wants to pounce on him?" Dale immediately started stammering and asked her ladyship what brought her here. But the girl turned to one of the knights and asked if he could bring her a chair. Then the girl sat down and said, What are they waiting for? Let them begin. Rupert was shocked. He asked, "Does she really mean it?" Rachel replied that, of course, no matter what the outcome was, it wouldn't affect them negatively. The girl says she gives them her word. Robert thought that an aristocrat from a highly respected family had made a promise. Dale asked, "Is she really not kidding?" He didn't understand what was going on since his sister had told him that she gave her regular medication, but then suddenly Rupert spoke up. He told the commander that he didn't want to stain his sword by fighting him. Dale was surprised and asked, "Is he delusional?" But the aide said he would use a wooden sword mock-up in such a case. The commander, that only made him angry. He pulled out his iron sword and said, "Make him regret everything," and swung it at the guy. But it didn't reach his face, so Robert decided to seize the opportunity. He quickly overtook him. After that, they had a small fight in which Rupert laid the commander on the floor so that he couldn't move. At this point, the guy thought he'd made his move, and he wouldn't be surprised if Rachel recanted, considering what kind of person was taking the Duke's place. But then suddenly the girl spoke and said that Rupert Archer from now on, now he would be the commander of the knight's troop. The boy was surprised. He hadn't expected such a turn. He really thought she would change her mind and say it was all some kind of joke or it wasn't serious. But Rachel said she would now give him his first order. After that, the girl asked him to send these parasites to jail immediately. Robert was very glad of such an order. He thought that the time had come when the Duchess had changed. He doesn't know what happened, of course, but it means that the time has come that everyone has been waiting for. Then Robert bowed before the Duchess and said that her order would be carried out. At this time in the study at the Agnes Manor, the head maid was sitting and resting. She made poor Annie wipe her hands. Abigail thought that heaven had directly helped her, and if that hadn't fallen into her hands, she doesn't even know what she would be doing now. The girl thought that no one suspected that the current Duchess was under the influence of a special substance. Everyone thinks that she is wallowing in sadness and emptiness after the loss of her parents. But it's really all thanks to the medicine Abigail is using. She didn't like what happened this morning, though. Normally, Rachel would start looking for alcohol immediately upon waking up, but this was the first time in 6 months that she'd strayed from the pattern. Addiction is a disease. It's not something you can get rid of with just will and desire. I thought maybe it was just a fluke and she was exaggerating. Then she turned to Anne and asked if the Duchess had said anything to her. The girl said at once that she had not. She had just asked her to tell her that she liked everything. The older maid thought that naturally she wouldn't go anywhere while the drug was in effect, and replied that if she did everything the maid asked her to do, her life would become much easier. Let the girl remember that. Anne replied, "Good." At that moment she thought what kind of disgruntled reply that was. Apparently she still didn't understand how things worked on the estate. Abigail thought that she would soon figure it all out. The real power in this manor was her. But at that moment, one of the maids came running into their room. She called for the head maid and said that the Duchess had met Baron Renton. The girl, hearing this, was very surprised. She wondered if Marcus Renton, the servant of the previous Duke, who was always giving her a hard time, had talked to her. The girl thought that if she had drunk that wine, she definitely wouldn't have agreed to meet him. She did not understand how it had happened. At that moment she shouted at Anne and said that David had said that she had given the wine to the Duchess. Anne replied that that was correct. As soon as she gave her the drink, then the Duchess told her to get out. Abigail was angry. She said that she had asked her to make sure she drank it, and at that moment a plate flew at the poor maid and smashed over her head. The head maid said she was fired. Tell her to pack her things and get out of this house. At this point, the girl thought that she should have gotten rid of this Baron Renton even earlier. Still, he had managed to meet her, and she didn't like that very much. After a while, Rachel was talking to Knight Rupert and told him to let him remember one very important rule, that no one is allowed to run away from the manor. The knight said it would be done, and he would do it by all means, but the girl said to keep it within the measures of reason, and he would not risk lowering it too much. To this Rupert said that she need not worry, because his name and honor were at stake, and he would surely do the job assigned to him. The girl thought he was going a little overboard after all. It was even stressing her out. Suddenly moving, she was a person to whom excessive fidelity applied. At this moment, the entire duchy was in a terrible state. Even the inner squad of knights had experienced it all. The rest wasn't even worth mentioning. Everything there was so bad. Many of those who held important positions were demoted, while others left the estates of their own accord. Then the minions of the head maid took over all the empty places. Rachel thought she needed to catch them as soon as possible and deny them the opportunity to escape. And reminds me how hard it's been for Liz. Then because of the head maid, she'll show up at the duchy exactly 1 year later. Because of all the suffering she'll have to endure once she arrives, she'll make an excellent villain. But Rachel thought that as long as she was alive, it wouldn't happen. She wouldn't let it happen. The girl laid a path of flowers in front of her. After all, it was only thanks to her that Rachel managed to survive that time. Then the girl turned to the knight and said, "We need to start catching these insects, and most importantly, the culprit behind all this trouble, Abigail." After that, Rachel headed to her office. When she opened the doors, Abigail immediately appeared in front of her. The girls were surprised to see each other. The girl walked to her office and sat down next to the jewelry, examining it. Afterward, she asked, "And what does she do here, in her office?" Abigail was scared, but she said she was doing some cleaning and heard something going on outside. That's what Rachel wanted to go to. Then the girl interrupted the maid and told Annie to come to her. The girl was surprised, but wiping away her tears, she approached the mistress. Rachel turned to Abigail then and asked, "Right, because the position of head maid is fine, isn't it? And power and jewels, as the soul desires." But the maid was surprised and asked what she was talking about, for she was choosing those that would suit the mistress. After all, these don't belong to her, and she has no right to wear them. Then Rachel asked if she understood correctly that it was all hers, and she pointed to a chest where there was a lot of jewelry of all sorts lying around. But at that moment, Rachel picked up a white handkerchief, tossed it on the floor, and told Abigail that she was grateful for everything. The maid was shocked. Rupert came up behind her and grabbed her shoulder. Abigail didn't understand what was going on. She was hysterical and started asking Mistress what was wrong and why she was treating her like this. The maid began to say that she had been devoted to her all this time, and the girl had taken her like that and made a sinner out of her. But Rachel told her that's what they would find out during the investigation, after she turned from the room to Anne, who had already calmed down. The Duchess said she thought she would need her help soon, and thought to pour new wine into the bottle. After Abigail was put behind bars, the question of bringing back the staff who had been demoted came up, and the first to arrive back were the butler and the former maids. Rachel immediately promoted the girl to head maid and gave her a list of errands, namely, give them staff, maintain the estate, check inventory and food supplies. As a result, all household affairs were entrusted to these two men. In the meantime, Rachel herself was just swamped with work because she hadn't done anything for 6 months. And in the meantime, her taxes had doubled. Prices skyrocketed, and many merchants closed up shop and left the duchy for fear of taxes. The streets were filled with the unemployed and homeless, and crime was up several times over. Rachel wished Marcus would come back soon because it was so hard for her to work alone. The girls had no choice but to send him off to find out what was in that bottle she kept trying to give Abigail. Rachel found herself thinking that there were still a lot of things that didn't add up in the story. The heroine was supposed to die, but in the end the girl moved into her body and changed everything. At that moment, Anne came into the girl's office and told her that the commander of the night squad had already returned. Rachel replied that it was good, and she would come out to him soon. After a while, the girl came down to meet the knight. Rupert immediately began to tell her everything. Rachel was actually surprised to hear that. She wondered which ones. Had Abigail really managed to appropriate so much in 6 months? To her it was simply amazing, but Rupert said it was only a part. The girl was shocked when she heard the word part. She had not expected it to be so bad. Knight said he just brought what was lying around in plain sight. Rachel said that if the secret savings didn't exist, it would be a lot weirder. A search of Waver County would definitely be good for their financial health. The only way to get the Waver estate and land was to get a conviction from the court. So there's nothing Rachel can do now. When the girl asked if Abigail was still silent, the knight said that yes, she was being tortured with interrogations right now. But she was not speaking. Not a word. Rachel said she was holding herself upright from the last of her strength because one wrong move could ruin her entire family. It was a felony to embezzle, and she dared to slip something to the Duchess. Rupert said it couldn't just go unpunished. In fact, Rachel was still embarrassed by such compliments, so she asked if he was done for the day, in order to somehow change the topic of conversation. But the knight said no. He had also brought the deeds to the house. After that, he handed her a roll of paper. Rachel was shocked when she read everything that was written there. She asked if they had also bought a house in the capital. Then she asked who had bought it. Rupert replied that of course it was Dale Weaver. The girl said that she thought it was worth checking what his salary was after all. But at that moment, Rupert handed the girl another stack of documents. Rachel looked at him and thought he was a strong knight. Quiet, calm like Bear, but she could see he'd been through enough already. After a long awkward silence, the girl spoke up and said that they all must have had a hard time because of her. But Robert said that no, of course not. Rachel knew, of course, that not only the people on the estate, but all the inhabitants of the duchy, had suffered at the hands of the landlady who had shifted all her responsibility to so treacherous a person. The girl could not even find words to describe it all. Rupert tried to comfort the Duchess, and said that even if there had been some moments, he was sure they would not happen again. Rachel smiled and said of course, she thought she'd do her best for her favorite character. Suddenly, when the Duchess wanted to go back, someone called out to her. The girl turned around in surprise to see who it was. At that moment, Marcus ran up to the girl. Rachel, when she saw him, was immediately happy and said that he was somehow late after all. The man was in a terrible state. Marcus didn't listen to the Duchess and said she needed to get a medical checkup now. The boy was shocked, and he was very nervous. At this time, somewhere on the battlefield, Dante Harold, aide to the Lexville family, said that he thought that was the end of it, and the rest could be let loose on the Margrave, and they could go back already. Among the barbarian tribes living on the border, there were those that even the Margrave couldn't handle. Their leader's name is Tex. He went against the Thracians together with his tribesmen and fought until the very end. But in front of Archduke Lexaville, he stomped the model while Lexaville himself was in charge of the defense. No one could invade the empire of Castor. At this point, the man turned to Dance and asked if he remembered how the Duke and Duchess had died tragically 6 months ago, and great trouble had begun. But the guy said that he told me that the mistress of the family abandoned all her business and started drinking every day. Dance replied that it was so. But the lad interrupted him and revealed that he had heard that a few hyenas had set their eyes on the duchy. Had they already taken the place in its entirety? Guy said no. Some even say the Duchess has taken to her wits and is now settling things. Dante thought it would be better for him to know about it. The boy was surprised and wondered how it was that that girl had finally come to her senses. He remembered that every time they met, she hid behind her parents' backs. The man certainly knows the rumors about him, but he doesn't know if the girl will be able to rule the duchy with such a timid soul. If a weak man becomes the head of a family, the ship is destined to sink in deep waters. The fate is already predetermined in advance. Ordinary things do not arouse interest. Then the man told Dance to return to the capital. The boy was very surprised and asked if he did not want to meet the Margrave. That man is Theo von Lexville, a man who in just 1 week destroyed an enemy that others had fought for more than a year. Even though it resolves these kinds of problems very quickly, it's terribly uncomfortable and very creepy, right down to the goosebumps. It's as if he doesn't care about other people's fate or affect him in any way. Still, Theo had always been a predator who only cared about the prey he would get while hunting. At this time, a doctor had already been brought in for Rachel, and he examined her completely. But in the end he said everything was fine, and he found nothing wrong. The girl asked, "How so, all right? What was in that bottle then?" Rumon Tudos, the former healer of the Agnes family, hesitated when he asked if Rachel knew anything about Puro weed. But she didn't know anything about it, so she asked what it was. Rumon explained that it was a rather famous poison, but in simple words, it kills the soul, putting it in a state so that it would not be reborn again. Rachel was surprised. She asked, "Does that mean she's been drinking this poison all this time?" The girl said that Baron Renton said she had taken it for 6 months. But in the end, the symptoms of poisoning by the poison could not be detected even by experienced healers and priests, since the manifestation of its action was very similar to the addiction to alcohol. But there is only one difference that can be noticed. If you apply it for more than 6 months, you will not be able to string words together into complete sentences. The doctor said that this poison was banned by the imperial family. If he hadn't met such cases before, he wouldn't have understood anything either. Rachel realized that meant that if the prohibitions were coming from the imperial family, then this herb couldn't be bought anywhere. Then she said she had to find out how Abigail had gotten her hands on it. But first she asked the doctor how come she was healthy, despite taking it for over 6 months. Ruman replied that, as he knew, a person could remain sane after consuming this poison only under 2 conditions. Rachel immediately asked, "What are those conditions?" And the conditions were that he either had to be a saint who had received God's blessing, or a mage with exceptional abilities. Rachel was surprised, and the doctor continued by saying that in all of history, only one person has managed to discover the gift. In fact, magic cannot be awakened by mere training. It manifests itself only in a select few, and a person with special abilities is born. 1 in a million, and such people are called magicians. There are many different elements. For example, Liz's element was water, but the girl didn't understand where such powers came from in her. She didn't feel them at all. At this moment, the doctor, looking at the girl, thought about the fact that this poison kills the soul. Maybe it had somehow managed to affect the character of the Duchess as well. When Rachel approached him, he said that not much was known about this herb, and one should be sure to keep track of her condition. The girl replied that was fine. It's not a problem. Afterwards, she thanked him for coming back, but Rumon had changed and didn't fulfill his duties until the very end. Despite devoting more than half of his life to the Agnes family, he was kicked out of the estate without any explanation. This place was like a second home to him. Rachel wondered how much he hated the duchy, and longed for it at the same time. Then the girl said that he was probably very tired on the road, so he could go rest, and if he suddenly needed him, Rachel would be sure to call him. Ruman agreed with her, said that if she felt anything amiss, let her go to him immediately, then bowed and left. After a while, Anne knocked on the Duchess's door and asked if she could come in. She said of course she could, and asked what was the matter with her. The maid came into the room with a tray containing many envelopes, and said that she had selected the most important of all that came to her. At this moment, Rachel immediately noticed the red-colored envelope, and she realized that it was a letter from the imperial family. At this time there were conversations going on in the basement of the Duchy of Agnes estate. Dale was talking to his sister and said it was all because of her. If they hadn't overdone it, they wouldn't have been locked up. But Abigail was surprised and said that he had come and agreed to all the terms. But her brother didn't say anything to her about it. Then the girl reflected that it was unlikely Rachel would execute them. After all, she was from a noble family. When the trial starts, they will need to cause concrete evidence, but the cure is almost unknown to anyone. Abigail thought she would just have to insist that she had nothing to do with anything, but the girl still doesn't understand why the Duchess is all right. After all, she had been slipping her this poison for more than 6 months. But then suddenly, she was interrupted by a knight who told her to go out, because it was her ladyship's order. At that moment, Abigail was overjoyed because she knew for a fact that the Duchess definitely believed in her loyalty. But it was ridiculous, that line about loyalty. I mean, she's not going to see the sunlight for a long time. Rupert led the maid through the woods, and thought her ladyship had given orders to solve the problem where not even a rat could penetrate. As they walked, Rachel sat in her office studying papers, and someone suddenly caught her eye. Name's Theo von Lexwell. Roughly speaking, he's a completely crazy person. The Lexvilles have been firebenders for generations, and even though magic isn't hereditary, the whole family had strangely awakened the very power of fire. But in return, they had to turn into hunters who spent their lives in fierce battles. So some people called it the blood curse, and the reason Rachel remembered it all. The letter says that the imperial family is throwing a banquet to honor the Lexvilles' victory in the war. That's what the letter said. After the main male character there, the emperor of the current archduke, was soon buried, and he has never been shown in a novella since. Rachel didn't know if she was allowed to participate, but then suddenly Marcus said that she knew everything herself, didn't she? They would have no other opportunity to let everyone know about the rebirth of the Agnes family. At that moment the girl's tears flowed. Marcus was surprised and asked if she was crying because of the Archduke of Lexville. He told her to just stay away from him, that's all. At this point, Rachel thought that because she knew what the end was in store for him, she would be uncomfortable with the encounter. The letter also stated that the current Emperor Giorgio von Castor is the main character's uncle, who will punish him in the future. The imperial family had imposed a ban on the sale of Piero's herb, The girl was already tired of all this information. She was even somehow uncomfortable. Suddenly, she looked at Marcus and saw the look in his eyes, then asked if he had anything to say. The man was surprised and asked what she meant by that. Rachel was referring to that girl named Liz Agnes. At that moment, Marcus thought that he had never seen the Duchess so sure of every word before. Rachel said that she knew for a fact that he knew where Liz was. But Marcus didn't understand why on earth she was determined to find her half-sister right now. Rachel asked, "So he's asking why she can't turn a blind eye to the fact that she lives on the street?" Marcus asked, "Out of respect for the previous Duke, could she make him a promise?" Right now, the state of affairs on the property leaves a lot to be desired. He thinks he should wait until things are better, and after that, he's sure to save dear Liz. At this point, the Duchess began to sign the papers, but Marcus didn't understand what she was even up to. Was she really asking this out of good intentions? Usually aristocrats would leave an illegitimate child to rot in the street, and sometimes even kill it. Then suddenly, his musings were interrupted by Rachel's voice, who asked, "What's the official announcement for the last 6 months? Taxes in the duchy have doubled. Because of this, people's peaceful life ended. Then it was announced that everyone would be exempted from taxes for the next quarter, and that the tax amount would be normalized again." Marcus replied that most of the residents can't read, so he has hired some people to spread the word, and soon everyone will know about it. At that moment, the girl thought about it and remembered that she could read. Only people from the upper classes. All whose social status is below average due to lack of time and money have not received proper education. Rachel thought that then they should definitely think about setting up an academy, because the earth that Liz would be living on would have to be completely comfortable and advanced. The girl can't let anyone hurt her. Not physically or spiritually, and for that, as the head of the Agnes family, she must become much stronger. In order to ensure that no one dares to look down on Liz in this life, she will do anything to make sure the girl finds her happiness. And first of all, she needs quite a lot of money in order to realize ideas. Things that once belonged to the older maid had to be secretly sold. That's why they could only get half the money they should. You can't shout to the whole duchy that her duchess was cheated by some maid. But still, that money helped to increase the duchy's budget a bit. They say that if the rich go broke, the next 3 generations will live on. At that moment, Rachel took the papers in her hands, reviewed them, and said that it was time to finish with business for the day after all. Marcus said he would check it out then. After that, he went through all the girl's ideas and said he approved it. It was very good news for Rachel, so she decided that in honor of it, she should go for a walk. The man was surprised and asked where she was going. The girl said she had to personally check the condition of her property in order to know the full extent of the situation. Marcus said he thought it was a little early to be exploring the grounds, but then the girl looked at him with a pleading look. He couldn't resist such pretty eyes and said okay. It would be her experience anyway. It was all very exciting for Rachel, but she was still happy about this possibility. And then she packed up and got into the wagon to go on her way. But it wasn't really as fabulous as it seemed, because the wagon wasn't very comfortable. And because of that, the girl was tossed around all the time. But Anne, who went along with her, said it was the first time she had ridden in such a comfortable carriage. If you compare it to a normal carriage, it's top-notch. At this point, Rachel was very surprised, but thought that as soon as she had saved the necessary amount of money, she would definitely deal with the problems of the local roads. After a while, the coachman stopped and said that they had already arrived in the city. There were a lot of people, all walking around doing something. Rupert, who went along with her, helped the girl out of the carriage. Rachel actually pretended to be a middle-class aristocrat, in order to prevent people from idealizing everything after learning that Ada was a duchess. After a while, they came to the market in the duchy's territory. Rachel thought it was an excellent place to learn about the economic situation. Then she and Anne began to walk past the counters. And at that moment, a sour odor began to reach the girls, and also she saw unsightly products. It was all low-quality goods. Rachel thought that supplies were hampered, for many merchants had left the duchy because of high tax increases. In fact, things are much worse than the girl imagined, and she can't even imagine how many more problems she has to solve. But then suddenly, Anne looked to the side and saw someone selling flowers, and it immediately caught her attention. There was a woman and a little boy standing in the middle of the street, shouting for people to buy flowers. This girl was his sister. The boy got very upset and said it was as if they were being overlooked on purpose, not buying a single flower all day. But his sister tried to calm him down and told him that everyone has a hard time, so don't let him cry. It's still ahead of him. Anne, who was watching the whole situation, turned to this girl and told her to wait. Rachel then approached them and said she wanted to buy all the flowers and asked how much they cost. The saleswoman was shocked. She said she'd give it all away for 3 silver pieces, even though it would have cost 5. But since she was taking everything, the girl would give her a discount. At that moment, Rachel took out a pouch of silver coins and gave them to the saleswoman. There were a lot of coins in the bag. When the girl took the basket of flowers, she said it even had too much money in it for that, but Rachel took the basket and said the flowers were just wonderful. The little boy looked at the girl and said she was just an angel who had bought all his sister's flowers. But truth be told, Rachel noticed them not only because of the flowers, but also because of the warm relationship between brother and sister. She wants to live in the same harmony with Liz in the future. At that moment, the Duchess returned to her attendants and handed them each a bunch of flowers, saying that they were a gift. Rupert thanked her and said it was the first time he had ever received flowers. Then Rachel suddenly asked Rupert if he had a lady of his heart. The knight was very surprised and asked if she meant a girl. He doesn't even have enough time for training, and there's no question of a relationship. And Anne said she didn't need anyone. She was so busy with her work, and that was enough for her. Rachel, hearing all this, thought that as soon as things got better, they should give them a proper rest. They probably deserved it. But then suddenly they heard the irritated voices of people who started to pass by, and everyone immediately turned around. The men who were moving the crates were talking among themselves. One of them asked what this Duchess was doing. There was no such thing under the last Duke. The other said that as soon as he thinks about this quarter's taxes, he feels like dropping everything and moving far away. At this moment, Anne came up to them and asked if her ladyship had not issued a decree exempting everyone from paying the tax of advertisements. The man looked contemptuously at Rachel and asked what she was talking about. The newly elected tax collectors go door to door taking people's last money. But then suddenly they heard some sound, like someone being hit, and they all turned around at once. They saw the men in cloaks saying that if the girl had earned money, let her pay. It was that flower seller. The girl screamed and asked them to stop. The boy, who was hugging his sister, told them not to touch her and let her go. Rachel was shocked to see all this. Then she turned to Rupert and said that she hadn't elected people to the position yet. The man agreed with her. Then she asked what was going on there in the first place. She then turned to the men who were harassing the saleswoman and told them to stop. One of them was surprised, then looked at the girl and said that he could see that she was from a wealthy family. Let her stay out of the way when others are working. Let her leave nicely. At that moment, Rachel realized why people said that the social order was unstable, and that these people were typical villains. In fact, the girl couldn't even think of such a thing. It was completely her fault, and she had to solve this problem. The girl who sold her the flowers thought it was too dangerous, and she couldn't let other people get hurt because of her. So she turned to her younger brother Nicky and told him to run away. Nicky was in shock. He didn't realize what was going on. But at that moment, the girl attacked one of the hooligans. At this moment, she shouted to Rachel that these people were very dangerous, so let her escape faster. But the girl didn't even budge. At this point, Rachel thought that when the dangerous moment comes, the true nature of a person is revealed. Then she turned to Rupert. At that moment, the bully turned to her and asked, she must have lost her fear. Rachel tells Rupert to just not kill them. She doesn't want to see such a cruel sight. The knight said the order would be obeyed, at which point he quickly ran at the ruffians, knocking their weapons out of their hands. The men couldn't even think to defend themselves. It was all happening so fast. Rupert was a masterful fighter. At that moment, Rachel approached the girl who was sitting on the ground and asked if she was okay. The bullies started yelling at Rupert and asking if he wasn't afraid of the Duchess. How dare he touch his tax collector? He said that the Duchess would not just leave it at that, and right now he would drop to his knees and beg for mercy. Rachel couldn't stand it. She took off her hoodie and turned to the bully, telling him not to make her laugh. Anne immediately shouted for them to stop immediately and pay their respects to Duchess Agnes. At this point, Rachel thought that Anne, despite her age, was excelling in her role. And the bullies, when they looked at her, they were shocked. They didn't expect to see the Duchess. Then Rachel turned to Rupert and said that some lowlifes were using her name and doing evil. Then she asked what punishment could be inflicted on them. The knight said in an angry voice that there was only immediate execution. The hooligans began to beg for mercy. They asked not to be killed, but to be spared. Rachel said she is exempting everyone from paying the tax. An ordinance has been issued for this. If someone suddenly has the courage to do that again, have them report it to her. After that, Rachel turned to the saleswoman and asked her what her name was. The girl replied that her name was Bella. Bella bowed and thanked the Duchess for her help. She said she didn't know how to repay her kindness. Then Rachel hesitated a moment. After that, she told the girl to come with her. She decided that she would be her personal maid. The day after the tour of the grounds was different. When Rachel returned, she told Marcus that not all the people had been notified and that the extortionists were still active. The girl said the world outside was so dangerous, and he still wouldn't tell her where her little sister was. Marcus remained silent. The girl thought he still didn't believe her, but she understood why that was so. She wouldn't believe him either. After that, she said they would do things another way. Rachel said she was done with all the business, and she thought that would be enough to get the problems at the duchy resolved. There was a lot of paperwork behind her. Then she turned to Marcus and told him that now was the time for him to keep his promise. And so finally that day came. Rachel was very happy because she finally got to see her beloved Liz. As they rode in the wagon to pick up the girl, Marcus thought about the fact that he had assumed it would take the Duchess a month to review all those papers. Besides, it seemed that the documents had been scrutinized and even some edits had been made. The man thought that this was respectable after all. This was exactly the kind of person he would be loyal to from now on. She was eager to meet Liz and worked hard, sacrificing even her sleep. Anne suddenly spoke up and asked the Duchess if she must be very excited. Rachel replied that of course she was excited. The girl said she would soon have a family. Since her parents died, she was left alone. Anne thought that apparently the Duchess had been very lonely all this time, and meeting her sister was a great privilege. When they were halfway to where Liz lived, Rachel suddenly stopped. She began to look in the mirror and rehearse her introduction. The girl said that the phrase, "Hi, nice to meet you, I'm your sister," would be a good one. Or should she introduce herself in some other way? Rachel explained that first impressions are very important. Marcus then asked if maybe he should go in first in that case. But the girl protested and said no way, she would go in herself. But at that moment the Duchess heard some shouting. Someone said, "I'm so sick of you, little girl, get out." And at that moment a girl fell on her lap. The baby was crying because she was hurt and offended. Then Rachel asked, "Is it really her, Liz?" Man is such a fragile creature. He tries to survive by any means to satisfy his desires. This makes his life seem tiny in Liz's eyes. She doesn't understand why everything comes so easily to the saint. You don't have to, Mandra. You have the hands to get everything she desires, girl. She's never gotten the warmth from others that she's been so readily gifted. I've never felt or known what serenity is. At that moment, Rachel lifted the head of the girl who had fallen to her feet and said hello to her. The little girl looked at her with tearful eyes, then took her by the hair and told her it was just like hers. But then suddenly she seemed to realize she was doing something wrong, so she took her hand away immediately. Rachel told her it was okay to touch if she wanted to. After that, she told the little girl that she had the same silver hair, just like her. And the little girl said her hands were dirty. At this moment, Rachel thought that no, it's okay to be really dirty. So it was at this moment that the voice of the landlady was heard, who shouted to the girls, "Let her try to show up one more time." Then the woman went out into the yard and saw Rachel, after which she asked her who she even was. Rachel looked at the hostess and said she was her sister. 8 years ago, when all the flowers in the garden were in bloom, a baby was left near the gate. The note said that they would work hard and send her money every month. "Let them take care of her and raise her healthy," said the inscription on a scrap of paper left next to the baby. The child's name was Liz. At this moment, the mistress thought that she had certainly suspected before that this girl was the illegitimate child of some titled family. But really, this is the daughter of the extraordinary rich. She wasn't easy. At this moment, the girl thought that if she tried hard enough, she could shake off a considerable sum of money from this girl. Rachel said that she wanted to thank her for looking out for Liz all this time. The landlady thought that, though she was not brilliant in intelligence, she was sure that this was an obscenely rich family who would give any money to save this little thing. It was obvious because she is able to hire knights for herself, but then suddenly Rachel said that she won't thank her. The owner laughed and asked if she was really this girl Liz's big sister. She was just being cranky, so the girl decided to scold her. Rachel got very angry and told her to shut up. Then she turned to Marcus and asked him if he had not told her that he had sent her money every month for the girl's maintenance. The man said yes, after the previous owner died. He was sending funds out of his own pocket. The last few months had been very difficult. Rachel thought that it had only been 2 months since she had stopped receiving money. It was obvious that the girl had been hurt much earlier. One look would be enough to realize that. At that point, Robert said that he was waiting for orders on what to do. Rachel then turned to Liz and asked what she would say. Would she go with her? The girl looked at Rachel briefly. After that, she asked, "Is she really her sister?" Rachel said that yes. They were even very much alike, after all. Their hair and eyes, that warm glow she longed for. The girl said she could give her love and care that Liz was sorely lacking. A calmness she had never felt in her life until this moment she would finally feel. It's only by being around Rachel. Then suddenly the girl lowered her head and asked, "Is it all going to be even if she's weird?" She could barely hold back her tears. But Rachel said she didn't care at all. If she wanted to stay by her side, the girl would put up with anything. And at that moment Liz, after a bit of thought, still walked over to the girl and took her hand. The girl was very excited about this opportunity. She turned to the little girl and said that it was time for them to go home. The girl sadly agreed with her. After the girls climbed into the carriage, Rachel turned to Rupert and told him to deal with the whole thing. As they drove along, the girl stared out the window in surprise the whole time. It seemed as if she had never been outside. Rachel looked at her and thought she was so small and thin, but she was described in the short story, the ordinary life of a commoner. At that moment, she thought, the girl would not allow herself to call what she had seen ordinary. The girl thought of Liz, her Liz. The moment she felt like giving up, the girl took her hand and encouraged her. Her mere existence is already a great miracle. She wondered what kind of life she was living in a world unknown and alien to her. She didn't realize what the girl had to go through before she would start living happily ever after. But at that moment, little Liz looked at the girl. Rachel then said that it was okay. She would be fine now. She had nothing more to be afraid of, and nothing more to worry about. That's what it feels like to be satiated just from watching someone else eat. That's what I was feeling right now as Rachel fed baby Liz when I got home. Aristocrats always have several kinds of viands on the table, depending on what kind of dish it is. It is served in special dishes set aside for that purpose. They are all used in different ways. Rachel thought that Liz probably didn't know that. It was good that the girl had asked in advance to prepare something simple to make the girl feel comfortable. Aristocrats were used to keeping things they treasured, like fountain pens, clothes, and toys from their childhood. Of course, Rachel was one of them. Her old clothes that had been saved from her childhood were perfect for Liz, and for the first time. It was a great option, but Rachel had said she would get her more appropriate dresses soon. But then suddenly someone knocked on their door. Rachel rejoiced and thought that she had come in time after all. Then she said that the girl could come in. And at that moment, a maid came into the room. Then the Duchess turned to Bella and said that it was the little girl, the one she would serve. Her owner, Bella, approached Liz, who was just finishing her meal, and said she was very excited to meet her. Bella. According to the rules of etiquette, I called the little girl Miss, but the girl did not like it and said that she was not Miss at all. Rachel then said that she probably just wasn't used to it yet, but it would be okay soon, and she would be comfortable like this. When the girls finished their lunch, Rachel suggested that Liz go somewhere together. The girl was excited and said that of course she would love to. After that, they left the room and the girl said it was all a gift in honor of her coming home. When they came out, they were immediately met by the maids. The party hall was decorated with bows and the like. Not far from them, at the end of the hall, was a cake, and a multitude of gifts surrounded it. Then Rachel thanked her for accepting it. At this point, little Liz became upset. Her tears flowed, and she asked why her little sister had come so late to pick her up. Rachel was upset. She knew it was very unkind of her, but said she was just very sick. In fact, she just didn't want to make excuses for Abigail's atrocities, so she said that because of her illness, she couldn't come to the girl and pick her up. It was a lie, of course. The real owner of this body had died before she knew that such a beautiful girl existed. And according to the story, it was supposed to happen that way. But now, Rachel has decided to lie and say she was just sick so as not to alarm Liz. After a while, the girl brought the little girl into one of the rooms and told her that it was now her room and asked her if she liked it. Liz was shocked first at the scale of the room, and secondly, the fact that it was separate and the girl would have to spend her whole life there. When Rachel said she was really glad she liked it, after that she said that as soon as she needed anything, to just let her tell her. At that moment, Liz thought she had been told the word thank you for the first time in her life, and she recognized what cake was. It turned out to be so delicious that it couldn't even be conveyed in words. So the girl thanked her sister again and said that she had enough of everything now, and she was insanely happy with this life. Warm words, beautiful things, and delicious food were all around Liz now, and it was all so new to her. The girl didn't understand where Rachel had gotten off being so sweet, kind, and generous to her. Then she said she had a question and asked why Rachel was so nice to her. After all, she doesn't even know what kind of child she is. In fact, the girl who got possessed in Rachel's body, her real name is Park Ye-on. She lives in South Korea. The girl was a promising actress, but no matter how brightly the star shines, there comes a time when it goes out. And Park Ye-on's star went out faster than others. The girl debuted at an early age and everyone showered her with their love. But because of her constant failures in her projects, people started making fun of her and writing all sorts of nasty things on the internet trying to hurt her. After she lost all the love of the public who had showered her with it, the girl fell into a deep despair in which she wallowed. Therefore, she soon began to avoid reality as much as possible. And in her virtual world, she met her, the beautiful Liz. Playing polite while trying to save face can only be done by those who aren't so eager to get what they want. She doesn't care when it comes to what she wants. The girl is not squeamish about anything, so Her Majesty must not even see her shadows if they don't want to be picked to pieces in the future. Remembering those moments from her past life, Rachel told Liz that she probably wouldn't understand her, but she was just her ray of light in the darkness, who, unlike herself, was much stronger than she was, who didn't care about other people's opinions. Life has real value only when you start to love. And knowing that all of Liz's efforts were in vain, knowing that she was nearing the edge of the abyss, the girl was there to support her the whole time. And all the long time she'd spent alone, only Liz had been able to save her. It made her the meaning of her life, the child who shines brighter than anyone else. And this time Rachel thought it was her turn. No matter what trials came her way, the girl would always be there to help and support her, just as Liz had done in her time.